Most people reveal themselves completely before they ever hurt you. They show you their patterns. They show you their habits. They show you how they treat people when nothing is at stake. And they show you, very clearly, what they reach for when they feel pressure. The problem is not that people hide who they are. The problem is that most of us are not trained to look. We listen to what people say. We accept what people promise. We give enormous weight to the words that make us feel comfortable, and we quietly dismiss the behaviors that make us uneasy. And then, later, when something goes wrong, we say we did not see it coming. But you did. You saw it. You just did not know how to trust what you were seeing. This audiobook is about learning to trust it. It is about developing the kind of quiet, grounded awareness that allows you to read people clearly. Not cynically, not coldly, but accurately. By the time you finish listening, you will understand why people behave the way they do. You will recognize the patterns behind the behavior. You will stop confusing charm for character and promises for proof. And you will know, with a calm kind of certainty, how to protect your peace without losing your warmth. This is not a guide to becoming suspicious of everyone around you. It is a guide to becoming genuinely clear. Because clarity is not a weapon. It is a form of peace. Chapter 1. People tell you who they are. You just have to watch. There is a version of every person that only appears when no one important is watching. Think about it. You have seen it. The coworker who is charming and helpful when leadership is in the room, and cold and dismissive the moment they leave. The partner who is generous during good times, but who becomes distant and punishing the moment you need something. The friend who talks about loyalty constantly and quietly disappears when things get inconvenient. These are not contradictions. They are data. When you learn to read behavior the way other people read words, you stop being surprised by people. Not because you become pessimistic, but because you start taking people seriously. You start believing what they show you instead of only believing what they tell you. Here is the first thing you need to understand. Every person you meet is already telling you who they are. They are doing it through their habits, through what they prioritize, through how they respond to inconvenience, through how they treat people who cannot do anything for them, through what they defend when their ego feels threatened. None of this is hidden. It is all there, in plain sight. The reason most people miss it is because they are looking in the wrong place. They are focused on the narrative the person is presenting, instead of the behavior running underneath it. Think of it this way. Words are the surface of a person. Behavior is the architecture. A building can have a beautiful facade, fresh paint, good lighting, an impressive entrance. But if the foundation has cracks, the facade will eventually start to show it. Not immediately, not loudly, but gradually, in small, consistent ways that reveal what is happening underneath. People work the same way. The most important thing to understand early is this. Behavior is not random. Every behavioral pattern a person has was built over years. It became a pattern because it worked at some point, in some context. The person who goes silent and withdraws when they are upset learned early that withdrawal was a way to feel safe, or to draw others closer, or to avoid accountability. The person who deflects every criticism into a joke learned that humor was a way to sidestep vulnerability. The person who always needs to be right learned that being right felt safer than being uncertain. None of these behaviors are accidents. They are strategies. Old ones, often unconscious, but strategies nonetheless. Once you understand that behavior is patterned and purposeful, even when the person themselves is not aware of it, you stop taking behavior personally. You stop asking, why did they do that to me? And you start asking the more useful question. What does this behavior tell me about them? That shift is enormous. It moves you from confusion and hurt to understanding and clarity. And clarity is where your power lives. The practical takeaway from this chapter is simple but important. Start paying attention to patterns over incidents. One behavior means very little. A pattern of behavior tells you almost everything. When someone apologizes after behaving badly, pay attention to whether the behavior changes. When someone promises to show up differently, pay attention to whether they actually do. When someone tells you they care about you, pay attention to whether their actions carry the same message. It is not that you should be suspicious of everything. It is that you should let behavior carry more weight than words. Because people can say anything. But what they do, consistently, over time, across different situations, that is who they actually are. One more thing before we move forward. When you start paying attention to behavior, you are going to notice things that are uncomfortable. You are going to see that someone you cared about has been showing you something difficult for a long time. And there will be a part of you that wants to rationalize it, or explain it away, or find a reason why this time will be different. That pull is normal. It is human. But it is also the exact place where most people lose the ability to see clearly. We will talk about why that happens, and how to work through it, in the chapters ahead. For now, start with this. Stop listening quite so hard, and start watching. Chapter 2. The trap of listening to words. Words are a comfort. That is their danger. When someone says the right thing at the right moment, something in us relaxes. We feel understood. We feel seen. We feel reassured. And that feeling is so powerful that it can override almost everything else we know. This is not a weakness. It is deeply human. We are wired for language. We evolved to communicate meaning through words, and to trust that meaning. The problem arises when we forget that words can be used to perform meaning, not just convey it. Think about the difference between those two things. When someone conveys meaning, they are using words to express something real, something they actually feel or believe or intend. But when someone performs meaning, they are using words to create an impression that may have no connection to what they actually feel, believe, or intend to do. The challenge is that both feel exactly the same to listen to. A person who genuinely loves you and a person who wants you to believe they love you can say identical things. The same tone, the same words, the same timing. And in that single moment, there is no way to tell the difference. The difference only becomes visible across time and behavior. This is why emotionally intelligent people become slow to update their beliefs about someone based on what they say, and relatively quick to update them based on what they do. It is not that they are cold or closed. It is that they understand where truth actually lives. Let us look at how this plays out in real life, because it is everywhere once you start noticing it. In relationships, a partner might tell you constantly that you are their priority. But when a consistent pattern emerges of canceled plans, broken promises, unavailability during important moments, or attention given freely to everything except you, the words start to ring hollow. Not because the person is necessarily lying on purpose. Sometimes people believe what they say in the moment they say it. But the belief does not translate into behavior, and behavior is what shapes your life, not beliefs. In the workplace, a manager might tell you that your contributions are valued and that advancement is coming. But pay attention to whether your ideas are credited, whether your workload reflects the reality of your role, whether you are included in conversations that affect you. Words about value and actual treatment of your value are two different things. Organizations are full of people who say the right things and do the narrower thing. In friendships, someone might tell you they are always there for you. But watch what happens when you actually need them. Not when it is easy or convenient. When it costs them something. When they have to rearrange their schedule, or sit with your discomfort, or say a hard truth on your behalf. That is when friendship becomes visible. None of this means that words have no value. They do. Words matter. They shape relationships. They communicate intention. They carry emotional weight. But words without behavioral backing are just weather. They feel like something in the moment, and then they pass. The practical framework here is this. When someone tells you who they are, or what they intend, treat that as a hypothesis, not a conclusion, and then watch the evidence. Ask yourself, is their behavior consistent with what they are saying? Over days, over weeks, over different situations, does what they do match what they say? If it does, that is meaningful. It tells you the words were genuine. If there is a persistent gap between what they say and what they do, that gap is the information, not the words above it. One of the most freeing things you can learn is this. You do not have to argue with someone about who they are. You do not have to convince them that their behavior does not match their words. You do not have to win that conversation. You just have to quietly update what you know and make your decisions from that clearer place. That quietness is a form of power. Not the loud, confrontational kind. The calm, grounded kind. The kind that comes from trusting your own observation over the comfort of someone else's reassurance. The next chapter will take this deeper. Because there is one specific situation where people reveal themselves most completely and most honestly, even when they would rather not. That situation is pressure. Chapter 3. Behavior under pressure, the only truth test that matters. Pressure is a kind of lens. Under normal conditions, most people behave reasonably. When things are going well, when they feel safe, when there is nothing at stake, Most people are pleasant enough. They are patient. They are generous. They are considerate. And it is genuinely easy to believe, in those comfortable moments, that you know who you are dealing with. But pressure removes the performance. When someone is under stress, or feels threatened, or faces something they did not expect, or is asked to give something they did not plan to give, a different version of them often appears. And that version, however briefly it shows up, is far more revealing than anything they have said or done during the easy periods. This is not about judging people for having difficult moments. Everyone struggles under pressure. Everyone has situations where they respond less gracefully than they would like. The point is not to use a single pressured moment to write off someone entirely. The point is to pay attention to what becomes visible under pressure, because that visibility is true. Think about what happens when someone's plans change suddenly. Do they adapt with some flexibility, or do they become punishing? Think about what happens when you disagree with someone about something important to them. Do they engage thoughtfully, or do they become dismissive, or hostile, or suddenly cold? Think about what happens when you need something from someone and the timing is inconvenient for them. Do they find a way to show up, or do they explain why they cannot? None of these moments are dramatic. None of them require a crisis. But each of them tells you something real about how a person actually operates when their comfort or control is slightly disrupted. There is a concept worth naming here, and it is something behavioral psychologists have observed across many different contexts. Most people have what you might call a pressure baseline, a default way they respond when things feel uncertain or threatening. Some people become controlling. Some become avoidant. Some become aggressive. Some become overly accommodating, then quietly resentful. Some shut down entirely. These responses are not chosen consciously in the moment. They are automatic. They are old survival responses that the nervous system learned a long time ago. And they tend to appear, reliably, under similar conditions, which is what makes them so useful as information. The person who becomes controlling under stress will keep becoming controlling under stress. The person who goes quiet and disappears when conflict arises will keep doing that. These are not isolated behaviors. They are the architecture of how that person handles difficulty, and they will shape your experience of that person every time difficulty appears. Understanding this allows you to make much more informed decisions about who you let close to you, not based on how charming or warm someone is during easy periods, but based on what you have actually seen when things got hard. In professional environments, this matters enormously. A leader who is calm and fair during smooth periods, but who becomes erratic, blame-shifting, or micromanaging during a difficult quarter is showing you something critical about how the environment will feel when the stakes are high. That is the information you need, not the quarterly town hall speech. In personal relationships, a partner who is loving and present during happy periods, but who withdraws, deflects, or turns cold during conflict is showing you the emotional climate you will actually live in when the relationship gets complicated. And every real relationship gets complicated eventually. The practical insight here is this. Give relationships time before you trust them with anything important. Not because people are not trustworthy, but because trust is only meaningful when it has been tested. And pressure is the test. Watch what happens when things get a little harder than expected. Watch how someone handles disappointment, inconvenience, a moment of being questioned, a moment of needing to give more than they planned. What you see in those moments is real. It is not the whole picture, but it is an honest piece of it. And an honest piece is always more valuable than a flattering illusion. In the next chapter, we will explore what it means to watch all of this with real skill. Because observation itself is a discipline, and most people have never been taught how to do it well. Chapter 4. Becoming a calm observer. There is a difference between watching people and observing them. Watching is passive. It is what happens when you are simply present. You register behavior. You have an emotional reaction to it, and then you interpret it through the filter of what you want or fear. The result is often more about you than about the person you are watching. Observation is different. Observation requires that you pull yourself back slightly, that you create a small, quiet space between what you see and how you react to it, that you let what is actually happening register before your interpretation rushes in. That space is where real understanding lies. Most people find this difficult, and there is a clear reason why. When we are emotionally invested in someone, our perception of them is shaped by that investment. We want things to be a certain way. We hope for a certain outcome. We have feelings about the person that make some interpretations comfortable and others painful. And so, unconsciously, we begin selecting which information to take in and which to quietly set aside. This is called motivated perception, and it is one of the most powerful obstacles to seeing people clearly. Motivated perception is not dishonesty. It is not stupidity. It is the mind doing what the mind naturally does, which is protecting us from information that feels threatening. If seeing someone clearly would mean having to make a painful decision or accept a painful reality, the mind will work very hard to keep that clarity at bay. The result is that we end up, often for long periods, in a state of partial vision. We see what we want to see, explain away what contradicts it, and build a relationship with the version of a person we hope they are rather than the version they are actually demonstrating. Becoming a calm observer means learning to gently override this tendency, not by becoming cold or detached, but by cultivating what you might call grounded curiosity, the ability to look at behavior with genuine interest in what it actually means, rather than immediate anxiety about what it might require of you. Here is a simple but powerful practice. The next time someone does something that surprises or upsets you, pause before you interpret. Just pause. Sit with the observation for a moment before you reach for an explanation. Ask yourself, what did I actually see? Not what does it mean, not what does it say about me, not what am I going to do about it. Just what did I actually see? This practice sounds simple. It is not. Our minds move very quickly from observation to interpretation, and the interpretation is often loaded with history, fear, and desire. But the practice of pausing, even briefly, before interpreting is one of the most powerful things you can train yourself to do. Over time, it changes how you experience people entirely. Another important element of becoming a calm observer is learning to remove your own projection from the picture. Projection is the habit of assuming that other people feel, think, or intend what you would feel, think, or intend in their position. It is deeply natural. Empathy itself relies partly on projection, but it becomes a problem when it replaces actual observation. If you are a loyal person, for example, you may assume that someone who says loyal things is also a loyal person. If you are someone who means what you say, you may assume that others mean what they say as well. And these assumptions can be deeply, quietly wrong. The antidote is not cynicism. The antidote is patience. It is allowing time to reveal whether behavior matches the expectation your projection created. It is holding your interpretation loosely, as a possibility rather than a certainty, until evidence accumulates. This is not a cold approach to relationship. It is actually a deeply respectful one, because it means you are taking the actual person seriously rather than relating to a version of them you constructed from your own experience. Calm observation also means learning to watch without needing to fix. Many people, particularly those with high empathy, struggle with this. When you observe pain in someone, when you see a pattern that is hurting them or others, there is a strong pull to step in, to help, to offer the solution, the insight, the conversation that will change things. Sometimes that impulse is genuinely useful, but often it interferes with clear seeing. Because the moment you shift from observer to fixer, your perception changes. You start seeing what supports the possibility of change rather than what is actually happening. Letting someone be exactly who they are, at least in your perception, without immediately needing to improve them, is an advanced practice, and it produces remarkably clear vision. The chapter ahead takes the discipline of calm observation and applies it to something specific and powerful: emotions. Because once you understand what emotions are actually signaling, in yourself and in others, the entire landscape of human behavior becomes significantly more readable. Chapter 5. What emotions are actually telling you. Emotions are not performances. They are data. Even when someone is expressing emotion in a way that feels manipulative, even when someone is using emotion to control a situation, the emotion itself, underneath the expression, is telling you something true about the state of that person's inner world. Learning to read emotional expression with this understanding changes everything. Let us start with something that might seem counterintuitive. The emotion that is most loudly expressed is rarely the emotion that is most important. Anger, for example, is almost never the primary feeling in any given situation. Anger is almost always the secondary response to something underneath it. Underneath anger, in almost every case, is fear, or hurt, or shame, or a sense of being disrespected or unseen. This matters enormously for how you interpret angry behavior. When someone lashes out at you, the anger itself is not the message. The message is whatever is generating it. And if you respond only to the anger, you miss the actual communication entirely. Think about what this means in practice. A partner who becomes angry when you spend time with friends may be expressing fear of being abandoned or not matching to you. A colleague who becomes hostile when their ideas are questioned may be expressing shame about not feeling competent enough. A friend who grows cold and punishing after you cancel plans may be expressing a deep wound around feeling like they are not a priority to people they care about. None of this means the behavior is acceptable, but it means it is understandable. And when you understand it, you stop being moved by it emotionally, and you start engaging with it intelligently. There is another emotional signal worth understanding deeply. Withdrawal. When someone goes quiet, pulls back, becomes unavailable, many people interpret this as indifference, as not caring. But emotional withdrawal is almost never about indifference. It is almost always about a kind of overwhelm. The person who withdraws has encountered something, internally or externally, that their nervous system does not currently know how to process. And so they retreat into a smaller, quieter space. The important distinction is between withdrawal as a processing mechanism and withdrawal as a control tactic. Some people genuinely need space to process their emotional experience. They go quiet, they need time, and then they return. That withdrawal is not about you. It is about their internal capacity. But some people use withdrawal deliberately as a punishment. They go quiet to create anxiety in you, to make you chase them, to shift the balance of power in the relationship toward themselves. This version of withdrawal is strategic, and it tends to appear consistently around the same triggers. The difference between these two is visible in the pattern. The person who needs space to process will communicate, eventually, what they were processing. They will return to the relationship and engage. The person using withdrawal as manipulation will remain unavailable until they get what they want, and the cycle will repeat. Learning to read that difference is a significant upgrade to your emotional intelligence. Now let us talk about emotional contagion, because it affects your ability to observe people clearly more than almost anything else. Emotional contagion is the phenomenon of unconsciously absorbing the emotional state of people around you. It happens automatically, at a neurological level. If someone near you is anxious, you will start to feel anxious. If someone in your environment is hostile, your body will register that hostility and respond to it. This is not weakness. It is biology. But it creates a very real problem for observation. Because if you are absorbing someone else's emotional state, you are no longer seeing them from a place of clarity. You are seeing them from inside the feeling they generated in you. And that is a very different vantage point. The way to manage emotional contagion is through what might be called emotional anchoring. Grounding yourself in your own state before you engage with someone who is in a heightened emotional place. Taking a breath. Feeling your feet on the floor. Noticing your own emotional baseline. And then stepping into the interaction with that groundedness available to you, rather than being immediately pulled into the other person's current. This is not about being cold or disconnected. It is about remaining yourself while engaging with others, which, paradoxically, makes you more genuinely present and helpful to them, because you are responding to their actual experience, not to the distortion of it that emotional contagion creates. The last thing to understand about emotions as data is this. The emotions people do not show are often more revealing than the ones they do. Someone who has no visible emotional response to a situation that would naturally generate one is telling you something. The person who never expresses needs, who always seems fine, who never shows vulnerability, is not necessarily a deeply centered person. They may be someone for whom showing emotional need felt very unsafe at some point. And that suppression shapes how they relate in ways that become visible over time. The emotionally flat person. The one who jokes through everything serious. The one who turns every conversation back to solutions before the feeling has even been acknowledged. These are emotional patterns. And they tell you, clearly, what the person does and does not have access to inside themselves. Now that we understand what emotions signal, the next chapter examines something even more foundational. The patterns. Because a single emotion in a single moment is just data. But a pattern of emotional responses, across time and across different situations, that becomes a map. And that map tells you almost everything you need to know about navigating your relationship with a person. Chapter 6. Patterns never lie. People often do. You have heard the expression before. Actions speak louder than words. But that statement is incomplete. The fuller version is this. Patterns speak loudest of all. Any single action can be explained. Any single behavior can be justified, contextualized, or dismissed. A person who is normally reliable can miss a commitment once. A person who is normally honest can say something misleading once under pressure. A person who is normally kind can say something cruel in a moment of pain. Single incidents are noisy. They contain information, but they also contain a lot of variation. Patterns, on the other hand, are where the signal lives. A pattern is what happens when you step back far enough to see not just what someone did once, but what they do, consistently, across similar situations. And patterns, unlike individual incidents, cannot be rationalized away. Think about how this works in practice. Someone cancels plans on you once. That is not a pattern. That is life. Someone cancels plans on you, or deprioritizes commitments involving you, consistently over a period of months, while managing to show up consistently for other things they care about. That is a pattern, and it is information about where you sit in their actual priorities, regardless of what they say about how much they care. The reason this distinction matters so much is because most people engage with incidents, not patterns. They deal with each broken commitment individually, accepting the apology or the explanation, resetting, and then encountering the same dynamic again. They remain in a perpetual state of managing individual moments rather than ever stepping back to see the larger picture that those moments form. Developing pattern recognition is one of the most practically useful things you can do for your emotional intelligence and your decision-making. Here is a simple practice. Pick any important relationship in your life. And instead of thinking about the most recent interaction with that person, think about the last 10 interactions, or the last year of interactions. What are the themes? Not the highlights. Not the best moments. Not the worst moments. The themes. What keeps appearing? What keeps disappearing? What does that person consistently give, and what do they consistently withhold? When you think at the level of patterns rather than incidents, the picture that emerges is often startlingly clear. Pattern recognition also protects you from one of the most common emotional traps in relationships, the high after repair. This is the dynamic where someone does something hurtful. There is a period of conflict or distance, and then there is an apology or a grand gesture of reconnection. And in that moment of repair, the good feelings are so strong, so flooded with relief and warmth, that they effectively reset your emotional memory of the pattern. This is not manipulation in every case, but in some cases it is highly calculated, because the person has learned that periodic repair buys them a great deal of tolerance for the behavior that preceded it. Pattern recognition prevents you from being moved by repair that is not accompanied by behavioral change, because you are no longer evaluating the moment. You are evaluating the trend. In professional environments, pattern recognition is equally powerful. The manager who listens to your concerns but never acts on them. The organization that talks about well-being but consistently overworks its people. The colleague who agrees with you in private but aligns with whoever is loudest in public. Each of these is a behavioral pattern, and it tells you something clear about what kind of environment you are actually in. The final point in this chapter is perhaps the most important. Patterns tell you who someone is under normal conditions, but they also predict who they will be under future conditions. People who manage their anxiety by controlling others will manage future anxiety by controlling others. People who protect their ego by avoiding accountability will avoid accountability when it matters most. People who have consistently chosen their own comfort over the needs of others will continue to do that. This is not a judgment. It is a prediction. And the purpose of seeing it clearly is not to condemn anyone, but to make informed choices about what you are willing to experience and what you need to protect yourself from experiencing. Speaking of which, if patterns make behaviors so visible, why do so many people still ignore what they see? That question leads us directly into the next chapter. And the answer, when you find it, will likely feel uncomfortably familiar. Chapter 7. Why we ignore what we already know. Here is a thing that almost everyone has experienced at some point. You knew, before it became a crisis, before it became undeniable. Somewhere inside you, there was a quiet, steady awareness that something was not right, that the person or situation was not what you needed it to be, that what you were being shown and what you were being told did not quite match. And you stayed anyway, or you waited, or you talked yourself out of what you already knew. This is one of the most universally human experiences there is, and understanding why it happens is essential, not so you can feel guilty about it, but so you can recognize it the next time it starts and make a more conscious choice. The first reason people ignore what they know is hope. Hope is an extraordinary human capacity. It is genuinely a beautiful thing, but it can also function as a kind of blindness when we direct it at people rather than possibilities. When we hope that someone will change, that they will eventually show up the way we need them to, that things will finally become what they should be, we are investing emotional energy into a future that has not happened rather than in a present that has. And the problem with hope directed at a person is that it requires you to minimize what they are currently showing you in order to make room for what you wish they would show you. Hope and clarity cannot fully coexist. You have to choose which one to center. The second reason is sunk cost. Not just financial sunk cost, but emotional sunk cost. The years you have invested, the times you forgave, the effort you put in, the way you shaped your life around this relationship or this situation. The more you have given to something, the more painful it is to acknowledge that what you have given did not produce what you needed it to produce. And so the mind does something understandable but counterproductive. It interprets the act of staying as a way of honoring what has already been invested. If I leave now, what was all of that for? But this thinking is a trap, because the answer to what was all of that for is never to give more of yourself to something that is not capable of returning what you need. The past is already spent. The only thing you have actual control over is what you do next. The third reason is fear of the alternative. Seeing clearly sometimes means accepting that a relationship, a job, a friendship, or a situation is not what you needed it to be. And the clarity of that acceptance brings with it a new set of unknowns. What do I do now? Who am I without this? What happens next? Those unknowns can feel more threatening than the familiar discomfort of what you already know. And so the mind unconsciously prefers the familiar pain to the unknown freedom. The fourth reason is social validation. We do not exist in isolation. Our perceptions are shaped by the people around us. If the people around you believe that a person is good, or that a relationship is fine, or that a situation is normal, it becomes very difficult to trust your own perception that something is off. You begin to wonder if you are the problem, if you are too sensitive, if you are asking for too much. This is one of the cruelest tricks of motivated perception at a social level. It uses the testimony of others to override the signal of your own experience. The antidote to all of these, the hope, the sunk cost, the fear, the social pressure, is not willpower. Willpower is not the right tool for this problem. The tool is grounded clarity. The ability to sit quietly with what you actually know, separate from what you want, and to respect what you find there. Here is a practice that can help. Ask yourself, if a close friend came to you and described this situation exactly as it is, exactly as you have experienced it, what would you tell them? What would you advise them to do? And then notice whether your answer to that question matches what you are doing yourself. Most people already know what they would say to a friend, and the gap between that advice and their own choices is one of the clearest indicators of where they are still overriding their own clarity. Seeing clearly is not always comfortable, but it is always kinder than staying in confusion. And once you begin to trust your own clear vision, you need to know how to protect it, which is what the next chapter is about. Chapter 8. The quiet architecture of healthy boundaries. Boundaries are not walls. This is a distinction worth making very carefully, because the word has become wrapped in a kind of defensive, almost combative energy that misrepresents what boundaries actually are. A wall is built to exclude. It says, you cannot come here. It is binary. Either you are inside or you are outside. And it costs enormous energy to maintain because it requires constant surveillance of the perimeter. A boundary is different. A boundary is a line you draw that communicates what works for you and what does not. What you are willing to experience in a relationship and what you are not. What you can participate in and what falls outside the range of what you can honestly give. The crucial distinction is that a boundary is not primarily about controlling another person. It is about being honest about yourself. When you tell someone, I cannot continue to have the same conversation that ends the same way every time without anything changing, you are not controlling them. You are being honest about your own limits. What they do with that honesty is their choice. You do not get to determine that, but you do get to determine what you participate in. This reframing changes the experience of setting boundaries dramatically. Instead of feeling like a confrontation or a punishment, a boundary becomes an act of self-knowledge. I know what I can sustain, and I am being honest about it. Now, understanding that intellectually and actually doing it are two very different things, because setting a boundary almost always involves an emotional cost in the short term. The person who has benefited from the absence of your boundary will often respond to its arrival with displeasure, possibly with guilt-tripping, with escalation, with withdrawal, with a sudden performance of neediness. And if you are someone with high empathy, these responses can feel unbearable. The guilt that comes with setting a limit can be so acute that it overrides the boundary entirely. Here is what is important to understand about that guilt. In many cases, the guilt is not a moral signal. It is a conditioned response. Many people were taught, often implicitly and in childhood, that their needs were inconvenient, that needing too much was a problem, that causing discomfort to others by insisting on their own experience was something to feel ashamed of. That guilt response got wired in early, and it activates automatically when you attempt to prioritize your own well-being in a context where someone else might be unhappy about it. Feeling guilty does not mean you are doing something wrong. It may mean you are doing something unfamiliar. There is a practical framework worth keeping in mind here. Healthy boundaries are not created in moments of high emotion. The most effective boundaries are decided in moments of clarity, when you are calm, when you have thought carefully about what you need, and when you can communicate from a place of groundedness rather than reaction. A boundary communicated in the middle of a heated moment tends to come out as a threat or an ultimatum. A boundary communicated calmly, clearly, and at a moment when you are not already flooded with emotion, lands completely differently. It communicates self-possession rather than panic, and it is far more likely to be taken seriously. It is also worth naming what happens when a boundary is repeatedly ignored. When someone consistently crosses a boundary that has been clearly communicated, they are showing you something important. Not necessarily that they are a bad person, but that they are either unable or unwilling to respect the terms you have set for your own well-being. And when that becomes a pattern, the most honest response is not to keep repeating the boundary with greater intensity. It is to make decisions based on the pattern you are observing. Boundaries that are not backed by consequences eventually become just words. And you have already learned, in this audiobook, what words without behavioral backing are worth. The relationship between self-respect and boundaries is worth examining closely, because boundaries are not ultimately about managing other people. They are about managing your relationship with yourself. Every time you override your own limit because someone else is uncomfortable with it, you send yourself a message. The message is that your experience matters less than their comfort. And when you send yourself that message repeatedly, over time, it shapes how you see yourself. Your sense of your own value quietly erodes. Every time you hold a boundary from a place of genuine self-knowledge, even when it is uncomfortable, even when it generates conflict, you send yourself a different message. The message is that your experience matters, that you are worth organizing your life around. And that message, repeated over time, builds something extraordinary. It builds self-respect that does not require outside approval to survive. That kind of self-respect changes everything about how you move through the world. And it is the foundation on which the next chapter is built. Because when you know your own worth, manipulation loses its power over you. And understanding how manipulation actually works is the most effective way to ensure it cannot. Chapter 9. Recognizing manipulation before it moves you. Manipulation works because it knows your emotional architecture better than you do. That is a precise statement, and it is worth sitting with. Effective manipulation does not arrive as something obviously threatening or wrong. It arrives as something that speaks directly to your existing emotional vulnerabilities, your need for approval, your fear of abandonment, your desire to be seen as a good person, your guilt about prioritizing yourself, your difficulty tolerating someone being disappointed in you. The manipulator, often unconsciously, has identified which of these is most sensitive in you, and they apply pressure there, not necessarily out of calculated cruelty. Many manipulative behaviors are not consciously chosen. They are survival strategies developed over a lifetime. But whether conscious or not, they operate the same way and produce the same result. They redirect your behavior towards serving someone else's needs while framing it as something you are doing for your own good, or for the relationship, or out of love. Let us look at the most common forms this takes. Guilt induction is perhaps the most common. This is the deployment of guilt as a behavioral control mechanism. The message, stated or implied, is that you are responsible for how the other person feels, and that unless you change your behavior, you will be causing them harm. The guilt-inducing statement might be direct, "You always do this to me." It might be indirect, "I just never know where I stand with you." Or it might be nonverbal, a sigh at the wrong moment, a silence that goes a beat too long, a facial expression that communicates disappointment before a word is spoken. The emotionally aware response to guilt induction is to ask yourself a quiet, grounding question. Am I actually responsible for this? Not in the defensive sense of refusing accountability when you genuinely are responsible, but in the clear-eyed sense of distinguishing between genuine accountability and manufactured guilt. If you have not actually done something harmful, the guilt is not information. It is pressure. Victimhood positioning is another common pattern. This is the chronic presentation of oneself as perpetually wronged, constantly suffering, always the one being overlooked or mistreated or misunderstood. The purpose, again often unconscious, is to make those around feel obligated to provide care, attention, and accommodation. It positions any request for reciprocity or any expression of your own needs as an attack on someone who is already struggling. It is important to say clearly that some people have genuinely difficult lives and genuinely experience suffering. But there is a distinction between authentic vulnerability and chronic victimhood as a social strategy. The distinction is visible in whether the person ever engages with their own role in their experience, whether they can tolerate your needs alongside their own, and whether the dynamic ever moves toward resolution or simply recycles. Gaslighting is a more severe form, and it deserves clear naming. Gaslighting is the systematic undermining of someone's perception of reality. It says, in effect, what you saw did not happen. What you felt is not real. You are too sensitive. You are imagining things. You always do this. The damage of gaslighting is not just that it creates confusion about a specific event. It is that over time, if you are exposed to it consistently, you begin to distrust your own perception as a whole. You stop trusting what you see and feel and know. And that erosion of trust in your own senses is one of the most disorienting experiences a human being can have. If you are in a situation where you regularly feel confused about what actually happened, where your clear memory of events is frequently contradicted, where you often end conversations feeling like the problem is always your perception, pay attention to that pattern. It is information. Love bombing, which is the overwhelming of someone with affection, attention, gifts, praise, and grand declarations of feeling at the beginning of a relationship, is a manipulation pattern worth understanding. It is not always conscious, but it floods the emotional system with positive experience in a way that creates a very strong attachment very quickly. And then, when the behavior changes, and it almost always does, the person is already bonded to the early intensity and will work very hard to try to recreate it. The practical protection against love bombing is the same as the protection against many manipulation patterns. Slow down. Let time pass. Watch what the behavior looks like across months, not just in the initial high. Real character does not need to rush itself into your heart. It simply shows up, steadily, and earns its place over time. What all of these patterns have in common is that they work by engaging your emotional system faster than your observational capacity can process what is happening. The defense is not emotional shutdown. It is emotional pacing, giving yourself the time and the space to observe before you respond, to feel before you decide, to let the pattern become visible before you act on a single moment. This is only possible if your own emotional system is reasonably regulated, which leads us directly into the most important skill in this entire audiobook, and possibly the most underrated one. Chapter 10. Emotional Regulation. The skill that changes everything. When you are regulated, you are free. That might sound like an overstatement, but consider what regulated actually means. Regulated means that your nervous system is not running the conversation, that your emotional state is not the primary driver of your behavior, that you have enough inner stability to choose your response rather than simply enact your first reaction. And consider how rare that actually is. Most people spend a significant portion of their social lives in some degree of emotional dysregulation. Not in crisis, not in breakdown, but in a low-level state of heightened reactivity, where a relatively small provocation can pull them significantly off-center, where an unexpected criticism can ruin a day, where a moment of rejection can spiral into hours of self-doubt, where a conflict with someone they care about can occupy their nervous system for days. This is not weakness. It is what happens when the nervous system has not been given the tools and the practice to find its own ground. And the cost of it is enormous. Not just personally, but in terms of how clearly you can see the people and situations around you. Because when you are dysregulated, your perception narrows. The brain, in a state of heightened stress, becomes focused on threat. It starts looking for evidence of danger, for confirmation of its existing fears, for the fastest path back to safety. And in that mode, nuance disappears. Complexity disappears. The ability to hold multiple perspectives disappears. You see what your threat system wants you to see, and you miss almost everything else. Emotional regulation, by contrast, expands your perceptual capacity. When you are genuinely grounded, you can see more. You can hold more complexity. You can hear a difficult thing without immediately needing to defend against it. You can be in the presence of someone who is dysregulated without being pulled into their dysregulation. You can observe clearly because you are not simultaneously managing an internal storm. This is why regulated people seem so capable in difficult situations. It is not that they are not affected. It is that their window of tolerance is larger. They can experience difficulty without their system becoming overwhelmed by it. And so they can continue to function, to observe, to choose, even when things are hard. How do you build this capacity? The first and most foundational step is learning to recognize your own activation. Before you can regulate, you have to know when regulation is needed. Your body tells you. Your heart rate increases. Your jaw tightens. Your breathing becomes more shallow. Your thoughts start to move faster and stick to a narrower range. These are signals. They are your nervous system telling you that it has registered something as threatening. Most people either ignore these signals or notice them only after they have already reacted. The practice is to start catching them earlier. To develop the habit of checking in with your body before responding, especially in high-stakes interactions. The second step is learning to create a pause. This is the most practical tool in emotional regulation. In any moment of heightened activation, before you respond, before you speak, before you act, pause. Breathe. Not dramatically. Not in a way that performatively signals your restraint. Just a breath. Just a moment where you let the first impulse pass before you decide what to do with it. That pause is where your intelligence lives. Before the pause, you are responding from your nervous system. After the pause, you are responding from your mind. The third step is developing what you might call an emotional return practice. A way of coming back to center when you have been pulled off it. This looks different for different people. For some it is physical movement. For some it is a few minutes of quiet. For some it is a specific kind of conversation with a trusted person. The important thing is to have it, and to use it, rather than simply waiting for the activation to pass on its own while the feeling continues to run in the background. The fourth and perhaps most demanding step is accepting that regulation does not mean the absence of feeling. It means feeling without being controlled by what you feel. An emotionally regulated person is not someone who does not get hurt, does not get frustrated, does not grieve, does not feel fear. They feel all of those things. But they have enough space between the feeling and the action that they can choose, consciously, how to respond to what they feel. And that choice is everything. It is the difference between reacting and responding, between being moved by a situation and moving through it with your own integrity intact. And nothing builds the respect of others more reliably than this. Not success, not charm, not the right words. When someone can be in a genuinely difficult moment and remain themselves, grounded and clear, it communicates something profound. It communicates that they are not controlled by their circumstances. And people trust that quality instinctively. Chapter 11. Authentic power versus performed strength. There is a kind of strength that makes noise. It presents itself loudly. It insists on being seen. It reminds you of its presence frequently. It takes up space. It interrupts. It dominates rooms and conversations. It reads as strength because it is doing things that strength is supposed to do from the outside. But when you press on it, When something genuinely demanding arrives, that loudness often reveals itself as performance, as a layer of behavior constructed to manage an insecurity underneath, as strength that is actually the armor of someone who is afraid. And then there is a different kind of strength, the quiet kind, the kind that does not need to announce itself, that speaks when it has something worth saying and is comfortable in silence when it does not, that can absorb a challenge without needing to immediately overpower it, that can tolerate someone else's success without feeling diminished by it, that can admit when it does not know something, that can change its mind when presented with better information. This is authentic power, and it looks nothing like the performed version. Authentic power comes from a specific source. It comes from being genuinely comfortable with who you are, not proud or defensive or performatively confident, but actually comfortable, at ease, not requiring constant external reinforcement in order to maintain your sense of your own value. That comfort, that self-possession, changes how you move through every social environment. When you do not need to win, you can engage honestly with ideas you disagree with. When you do not need to dominate, you can let others be skilled and feel glad about it. When you do not need to be liked, you can tell the truth in situations where the truth is inconvenient. When you do not need to seem strong, you can acknowledge difficulty without feeling like it reveals a fundamental inadequacy. These are capacities that the performatively strong person does not have available to them, because all of their energy is going into maintaining the performance. And here is the social intelligence component of this. People sense the difference. Not always consciously, but at some level, human beings are exquisitely sensitive to whether the presentation they are receiving matches the reality underneath it. They may not be able to articulate what feels off about someone whose confidence is performed rather than genuine, but they feel it. There is a quality of unease or distance or something not quite landing right. Genuine self-possession, on the other hand, creates a very specific feeling in others. It creates safety. And safety is one of the most valuable things you can create in any relationship, personal or professional. Because when people feel safe with you, they are more honest, more creative, more collaborative, more loyal. Safety is the foundation of genuine connection and genuine trust. The difference between authentic and performed strength also becomes starkly visible during conflict. The performatively strong person cannot tolerate being questioned without either counterattacking or withdrawing, because the question threatens the architecture of the performance. The authentically strong person can be questioned, challenged, even criticized, and remain genuinely open to the possibility that the challenge contains something worth considering, because their self-worth is not housed in the defense of a particular position. Think about the people in your life or in your experience who have struck you as genuinely powerful. Not impressive in a loud way, but actually powerful. What is the quality they share? Almost always, it is presence, a kind of groundedness that makes them feel completely themselves in any situation. They do not seem to need the room to feel a certain way about them. They simply occupy their own space fully and let others occupy theirs. That is what we are building toward in this audiobook. Not a performance of confidence, not a strategy for seeming strong, but the real thing, the quiet, grounded, fully inhabited version of yourself that does not require the approval of others to feel complete. The final 2 chapters will show you how to put all of this together. First, in the specific context of navigating difficult people, and then, in the broader context of what it means to live with genuine clarity about the world and the people in it. Chapter 12. Navigating difficult people without losing yourself. Difficult people are everywhere, and the most difficult thing about them is not the behavior itself. It is what the behavior does to you internally. The person who pushes your limits is not just difficult because of what they do. They are difficult because of what their behavior activates in you. The guilt, the self-doubt, the frustration, the compulsion to fix or defend or explain or withdraw. The way they seem to knock you off your own center and pull you into a dynamic that does not serve you. Navigating difficult people is therefore not primarily a social problem. It is a self-regulation problem. The question is not just how do you deal with them. The question is how do you stay yourself while dealing with them. The first principle is this. You cannot change a difficult person by continuing to engage with the behavior that is causing the difficulty. This is perhaps the most important thing in this chapter and one of the most consistently ignored. When someone is behaving in a way that is hurtful or manipulative or simply corrosive, the natural human impulse is to engage with it, to explain why the behavior is a problem, to ask for it to change, to react to it emotionally, to try to reason your way through it, to meet it with more relationship energy in the hope that connection will dissolve it. But engaging with the behavior at its level almost never produces the result you want. It usually escalates it, or reinforces it, or teaches the person that the behavior gets your attention and energy, which is often exactly what it was seeking in the first place. The more effective response is what you might call strategic disengagement, not abandoning the relationship, not becoming cold, but simply not providing the response that the behavior is designed to elicit. If someone is seeking your guilt, you do not feed the guilt. If someone is seeking your defensiveness, you do not become defensive. If someone is seeking your anxiety, you do not perform anxiety. You remain calm. You may acknowledge what is happening briefly and honestly, but you do not climb into the emotional space the behavior is trying to create. This is harder than it sounds. It requires the regulation we talked about in the last chapter. It requires that your own emotional system be grounded enough to observe the behavior without being immediately pulled into it. But when you do it consistently, something interesting happens. The behavior, over time, tends to reduce, because it is not getting the response it was optimized for. This is not guaranteed. Some people escalate when their usual tactics do not work, but many do not. And even when escalation happens, you are still in a fundamentally different position than if you had engaged reactively. The second principle in navigating difficult people is to get very clear about what you can and cannot control. You cannot control whether someone is difficult. You cannot control their patterns, their triggers, their history, their choices. You cannot make them less insecure or more self-aware or more capable of behaving differently than they have always behaved. What you can control is your own response, your own level of engagement, your own proximity to the behavior, and your own decisions about what you are willing to tolerate as part of your daily experience. This sounds like a small thing, but it is enormous. Because the moment you accept that your power is not in changing the other person, but in choosing your own response, you stop waiting for them to become what you need them to be, and you start making decisions based on who they actually are. The third principle is perhaps the most counterintuitive. Some difficult people should not be navigated at all. They should be distanced from. Not every difficult person is a problem to be solved. Some are just wrong for your life. They cost too much. They require a quality of management that leaves you depleted and unable to invest fully in the people and things that are genuinely good for you. And the most honest response to recognizing that is not to find a better strategy for maintaining the relationship. It is to reduce it to the level at which it does you no harm. That reduction can look like many things. Limiting how often you see someone. Keeping conversations at a certain level of depth. Removing yourself from a professional environment that is toxic. Stepping back from a friendship that has become one-directional. None of these are dramatic ruptures. They are quiet, clear-eyed recalibrations. And they are profoundly kind to yourself. The fourth principle is to maintain your internal narrative carefully. When you are regularly around someone who diminishes, criticizes, manipulates, or simply demands more than they give, there is a risk that their version of you begins to colonize your own self-perception. That their narrative about who you are, what you deserve, or what you are capable of begins to feel more real than your own. Protect your internal narrative deliberately. This means spending time with people who reflect back a version of you that is accurate and generous. It means keeping connection with your own history of competence and your own sense of your values. And it means regularly returning to the grounded, regulated, clear-eyed version of yourself that knows the difference between another person's projection and the actual truth. Difficult people are often the most valuable teachers available to you, not because they teach wisdom intentionally, but because they test, very specifically and very concretely, exactly the qualities you are trying to build. Your regulation, your observational clarity, your boundaries, your self-respect, your quiet power. Every time you navigate a difficult dynamic without losing yourself, you consolidate something. You become a little more able to trust yourself in complexity. A little more certain that your own ground is solid enough to stand on when the social environment around you is not. And that brings us to the final chapter, which is not about a technique or a framework. It is about what becomes possible when you can actually see clearly. Chapter 13. the freedom of seeing clearly. There is a specific kind of peace that comes from seeing things as they are. Not things as you want them to be. Not things as you are afraid they might be. Not things filtered through hope or anxiety or the need for a particular outcome. But things as they actually are, in the quiet, clear light of honest observation. This is the destination this audiobook has been building toward. Because everything we have explored, reading behavior over words, recognizing patterns, understanding emotions as data, becoming a calm observer, setting boundaries, regulating yourself, navigating manipulation, building authentic strength, all of it points toward one central capacity. The capacity to see clearly and to live honestly from what you see. And the freedom that comes from that capacity is unlike any other kind of freedom. When you can see people clearly, you stop being surprised by them. Not in a cynical way, not in a way that assumes the worst, but in a grounded way that simply acknowledges who someone actually is and relates to them from that honest place. You stop investing in the version of them that only exists in your hope. You stop grieving, repeatedly, the gap between who you need them to be and who they are. You simply see them, and you make your choices from that clarity. This eliminates an enormous amount of suffering. Most of the suffering in relationships, personal and professional, is not caused by the difficult behavior itself. It is caused by the gap between what we expected and what actually happened. The betrayal, the disappointment, the confusion. All of these arise from a mismatch between reality and the story we were telling about it. When your story matches reality, those shocks largely disappear. Not because reality becomes more comfortable, but because you are no longer adding the pain of surprise to the pain of the difficulty itself. When you can see yourself clearly, something equally important happens. You stop performing. You stop trying to maintain a version of yourself designed to earn a particular response from others. You stop shrinking yourself in contexts where you have learned that your full presence makes others uncomfortable. You stop inflating yourself in contexts where you have learned that seeming strong is the only way to be respected. You simply inhabit yourself, completely and without apology. And inhabiting yourself fully is one of the most disarming things a person can do, because it makes you genuinely present in every interaction. Not strategically present, not performatively present, actually there. An actual presence is rare enough that people feel it immediately, and they respond to it differently than they respond to anything else. When you can see situations clearly, you gain the ability to make decisions that are aligned with your actual values rather than your reactive impulses. You can look at a relationship, a job, an opportunity, a challenge, and evaluate it against what you actually know rather than what you feel in the moment. You can choose to stay in something difficult because you understand why the difficulty is worth engaging with. You can choose to leave something that seems comfortable because you can see, clearly, that it is costing you something you cannot afford to keep giving. Clarity is not pessimism. It is not an absence of feeling or warmth or generosity. Seeing someone clearly does not mean only seeing their limitations. It means seeing them wholly. Their strengths, their wounds, their patterns, their potential, their actual behavior, and choosing how to engage with all of that honestly. The clearest people are often the most generous. Because they have stopped spending their energy on confusion and rationalization, they have more of themselves available for genuine connection. And because they are not relating to a projected version of someone else, they can actually receive and appreciate who that person really is. There is one more thing worth saying before this audiobook ends. Learning to see clearly is not a destination you arrive at once and stay. It is a practice. It is something you return to again and again, in every relationship, in every difficult moment, in every situation where something in you wants to look away from what is actually happening. You will slip. You will invest hope where behavior is not supporting it. You will take words at face value when the actions tell a different story. You will let your regulation slip and react when you meant to respond. You will miss patterns that were visible in hindsight. That is not failure. That is the texture of a genuine human life. The point is not to see perfectly. The point is to keep returning to the practice of honest looking. To keep asking, not what do I want this to mean, but what does the evidence actually show? To keep building the habit of trusting your own observation over the comfort of someone else's reassurance. Every time you do that, even imperfectly, you are building something. A relationship with your own perception that is more trustworthy, more grounded, more free. And that relationship, The one you build with your own honest inner knowledge is the most important relationship you will ever have. Not because it keeps people at a distance, but because it allows you to let the right people close in the right way, at the right depth, for the right reasons. That is not armor. That is wisdom. And wisdom, of the quiet, grounded, earned kind, is the thing that makes everything else possible.